Apple's industrial design team has long been admired for their incredible work in a variety of product categories. In fact, their exceptional talent has earned them the title of the most awarded design studio in the world, and nearly every Apple fan knows the face of their design team, Jonathan Ive. He's been with the company since September of 1992 and deserves credit for some of their most iconic product designs. But after 25 years of working exclusively for Apple, Jonathan Ive has decided to leave the company at the end of the year and create his own independent design firm called LoveFrom. This move has left everyone in the tech community speculating as to why he left Apple and what his decision means for the future of the company's design team. This is Greg with Apple Explained, and I want to thank Ting for sponsoring this video. If you want to help decide which topics I cover, make sure you're subscribed, and these voting polls will show up in your mobile activity feed. So if you've been following the news about Jonathan Ive leaving Apple, you've probably seen very similar comments and articles as when Steve Jobs resigned in 2011. Things like this, and that, my friends, is how the story ends. Beginning of the end of Apple. I think this is not good news for Apple's future. Why now? I think they're not telling us something. Some internal battle or debate we don't know about. And that last quote was the first reaction of many news outlets and pundits, who made the assumption that something must be wrong with Apple's leadership if talented people like Jonathan Ive are leaving. But this theory is founded on nothing but hearsay, rumors, and speculation. If we consider the observable evidence over Apple's history, the truth becomes much clearer and much less sensational than others may have you believe. Let's start by pointing out that no one from Apple's original design team formed in 1991 is still with the company today. There have always been people leaving and joining the team, under Jobs' leadership and Cook's leadership. We also have to consider that all of our attention is placed on Apple's small industrial design group of 20 to 22 members, despite the fact that there are literally hundreds of other product designers at Apple not part of that small exclusive team. And when one person leaves Apple's industrial design group, it tends to create a domino effect of others following suit. It happened in 2000 when 5 people left the team in close proximity, and again earlier this year when 3 people announced their departure, followed by Jonathan Ive himself in June. And Steve Jobs' biographer Walter Isaacson certainly didn't help the situation when he went on CNBC and said, "In my book, Steve says how Tim Cook can do everything, and then he looked at me and said, 'Tim's not a product person.'" He later went on to say, sometimes Steve, when he was in pain and it was problematic and he was angry, he would say more things than Cook was not a product person. I felt I would put in the specific things that were relevant to the reader, but not the complaints. Those comments quickly fueled the fire that the Wall Street Journal had ignited just a week earlier with their article titled, "Jony Ive is leaving Apple, but his departure started long ago." And just by simply reading the subheader, you get a clear picture of the article's argument. It reads, "Design chief helped create some of the world's best-known products, but grew distant as the company shifted focus under CEO Tim Cook." The implication being that Apple's focus has changed since Steve Jobs' death. But if you saw my video last week titled "Why Apple Has Not Changed," you'll understand that the Wall Street Journal's article is false, or at least extremely misleading. Because if you were aware of Steve Jobs' temper and personality, it would come as no surprise that he used pointed language when frustrated or angry, and he was also known for having a certain opinion one day and completely changing his position a few days later. So you'll likely find much more truth in his actions rather than his words. And when it came to Steve Jobs' actions in regard to Tim Cook, the evidence is unmistakable. Jobs actually poached Cook when he was working at Compaq in 1998 and persuaded him to work for Apple, despite the company floundering and being at serious risk of bankruptcy. To any rational person, leaving Compaq, one of the leading tech companies at the time, to join Apple, a sinking ship, was career suicide. And this is what Cook later said about the decision. No more than 5 minutes into my initial interview with Steve, I wanted to throw caution and logic to the wind and join Apple. My intuition already knew that joining Apple was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work for the creative genius and to be on the executive team that could resurrect a great American company. Many people give Steve Jobs all the credit for bringing Apple back from near bankruptcy in the late 90s, but even Jobs himself admitted the achievement was a team effort that wouldn't have happened without the talents and expertise of people like Cook. And when it comes to allegations of Tim Cook shifting Apple's focus from hardware to operations, or not being a quote product person, Just take one look at what Apple has accomplished with Cook as CEO. He spearheaded the Apple Watch project, which was not only one of the most complex projects from an operations perspective, but also one of the most successful products from a hardware perspective. The Apple Watch has dominated the industry with 51% market share in the fourth quarter of 2018, and no other product in the category is even close to catching up. The AirPods were developed under Cook's leadership and has become a global phenomenon. In fact, revenue from the Apple Watch and AirPods combined recently surpassed the iPad, which is quite an achievement considering the original iPad was the fastest-selling product in Apple's history. Now, I say all that about Tim Cook in order to make it clear that Jonathan Ive didn't leave Apple because he felt they were no longer a product-driven company or because he had problems with their leadership, which is what many people are claiming. And this can be proven by comparing Apple's hardware today with that of the mid-90s, when Apple's leadership truly valued making cheap products rather than products with great design. And this quote from Mei Lee Ko in an interview she did with Rene Ritchie said it all. She said, "It's about the organization support around the design team much more than it is about whether or not there's creativity or great designers inside the organization." And I think that's an incredibly important distinction that many people don't consider. Jonathan Ive was working under poor management in the 90s before Steve Jobs returned to Apple. He admitted to feeling uninspired and defeated since the leadership was forcing the design team to simply fit as much technology into cheap beige boxes as possible. And the hardware Apple produced during that period was exactly that, cheap and uninspired. But it wasn't for lack of talent or creativity, it was due to poor support and management. That's absolutely not the case today. Apple is still producing products with incredible hardware and maintains an environment conducive to great industrial design. So then what are some of the possible reasons why Jonathan Ive decided to leave? Well, I think there are a few explanations. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Jonathan Ive has been working for Apple for 27 years. It's where he established his reputation as one of the world's leading designers and how he became well known. But over the past decade, we've seen Ive express interest in designing products outside the tech industry. In 2013, he partnered with Mark Newson to help create various products for a Red charity auction, including a Leica camera and aluminum desk. In 2018, they teamed up again to create a diamond ring. And keep in mind, Jonathan Ive's passion for design started with cars, and he admitted designing computers was something he never thought he'd do as a young adult. So it isn't hard to imagine that Jonathan Ive would like to branch out and get involved with a variety of industrial design projects, rather than being limited to the scope of Apple products. But what's perhaps more concerning for Apple fans is what might happen to the company after Jonathan Ive's departure, and this takes me back to the Steve Jobs situation back in 2011. When Tim Cook was appointed CEO, Apple's stock tanked, and article after article was written signaling doom and gloom for the company since it no longer had the leadership of its iconic founder. But those doomsday predictions aged quite poorly as Apple went on to become the world's first trillion-dollar company thanks to the success of new products like the iPhone X, which were released under Cook. And I suspect history will repeat itself when it comes to Jonathan Ive. You see, the ethos of Apple is much bigger than one person. It didn't go away when Jobs left in 2011, and it won't go away when Ive leaves later this year. In fact, I think Jonathan Ive had much more time to prepare for his departure than Jobs, and the team he's leaving behind is not only well-trained and talented, but it's organized in a way that fosters great design. Also, the woman taking over for Jonathan Ive, Evans Hankey, has worked alongside Ive on products like the iPhone and iMac, and has over 300 patents to her name. She has an incredible reputation within Apple, and she will certainly be a fantastic vice president of industrial design. It's also worth mentioning that Jonathan Ive will still be involved with Apple's design team, since they'll be his firm's first client. So while it can be scary to see iconic figures like Steve Jobs and Jonathan Ive leave Apple, it's important to understand that the company doesn't die simply from their absence. As long as Apple continues to make incredible products that surprise and delight users, they won't be going anywhere anytime soon. And you can't discuss services that delight users without mentioning Ting, a mobile carrier that actually makes sense, because they charge you based on how much data you use instead of an arbitrary amount every month. When you call them for help or support, you talk to a real person at no extra cost. There's no holds, no transfers, and no robots. And since you only pay for what you use, the average Ting bill is just $23 a month per device. Now, if you're stuck in a contract but would like to switch to Ting, they'll actually cover 25% of your cancellation fee up to $75. So head over to ae.ting.com, you can find that link in the description, and try out their bill estimator. Enter how many minutes, texts, and how much data you use on average based on your last bill, and you can see how much you'd save with Ting. Then, when you sign up with our link, you'll receive a $25 credit toward your service bill or a new device. That link again is ae.ting.com. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.